Hope you're doing well. So I told you that I wanted to do a book review on The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. The main being is that liberal, feminist, progressive Democrats really bring this up a lot. This is The Handmaid's Tale, and it has sold many copies. It's becoming a cultural phenomenon, and if a text has started to have an influence on the masses, I think that it's important for us to be ahead of the curve and meet them head on and see what it's all about. Okay? Now, in the beginning, the text opens with a gymnasium scene, so it's very descriptive, and I will compliment the author that she really goes into details. And I'll give you an example. So it opens with, "We slept in what had once been the gymnasium. The floor was varnished wood, with stripes and circles painted on it, for the games that were formerly played there. The hoops for the basketball nets were still in place, though the nets were gone. A balcony ran around the room for the spectators, and I thought I could smell faintly, like an after image, the pungent scent of sweat shot through with the sweet taint of chewing gum and perfume from watching girls." And then it goes on. You see how she uses imagery and the five senses to kind of bring you into the character's development. And so, remember, this isn't a dystopian, what she considers a dystopian society of something called Gilead. And the Christians have taken over and have created a totalitarian society. And the Catholics are outlawed, but the Quakers, the Baptists, they are there. Okay? So it's quite strange when you think about how she goes about shaming Christianity, but also using them in the text. Okay, so the other interesting aspects is that the handmaids, when they're in the red center, they are sleeping on army cots, and they're in rows, and there's spaces between them so they can't talk. She sets this up to where you really feel a sense of control. They also have army issued blankets. There's these characters called the aunts, which this hints at the nuns, because nuns are called sisters. So she didn't say Sister Mary smacked us so and so. She says aunts. And there's Aunt Sarah, Aunt Elizabeth, and there's several other aunts. And these aunts, they patrol the rooms where the handmaids sleep. And they have these electric cattle prods slung on and hanging from their belts. And I thought that was strange to have a cattle prod. It's an electrical taser type of instrument. Now, the thing about the cattle prod is that it hints at it's used to make a stubborn animal go, and cows are used as dairy animals. And a cow when they're perpetually impregnated in order to produce veal and dairy, they don't really have much of a destiny, and then once they are finished, they are sent to the slaughterhouse. And I have seen feminist art now depicting the cervix with the ovaries as the face of a cow that has a tag on its ear. And you can see how this book has already made the feminists use it for their pro-abortion movement. So it is very clever that she puts the cow prod in there, because it's not the typical whip, it's not a chain or some other device used against the women, but rather it is a electrical cattle prod. So it's gonna hurt. I just want you to understand how she's setting this scene up for the totalitarian society. Now there's these guards, and they're specially picked from what are called the angels. And the guards, they're not allowed to go inside the building except when they're called, and the handmaids are not allowed to go outside except for walks twice a day, 2 by 2, around the football field or when they go on chores and stuff like that. There's a chain link fence with barbed wire, and the angels, they stand outside of it with their backs to the people, and she contends that the handmaids are an object of fear to the angels, but also something else as well. So already she calls the guards angels. Now when we think of angels as Muslims, and let's say even Christians, they think of it as an angelic being that is kind but also firm. Now we know that Malik is a guardian in hell, right? If I recall his name correctly, and he never smiles. I recall the hadith. So when we see an angel, we think of something that cannot disobey the will of Allah. But she uses the Christian vision of angels. If you look at the history of Christian art, how angels are depicted as crying over humans. We have in Islam, the angels will supplicate for us, answer back. Like when we say, like if you go in prayer, you read the Quran, there's hadiths that talk about how an angel can be witnessing you doing that. You know, the angels ask forgiveness for humans. Not that you use an intermediary, but it's like, oh Allah forgive him, oh Allah have mercy on him. If you recall those hadiths, without getting into the weeds. So the way in which the Muslim mind views an angel, and the way in which the Christians view angels, we see them as beings that are good. But she took that word with all of its attached meanings and flipped them to be the guards who oppress these women in their facilities to where they cannot escape. So it's important to see that, and it's important to see where she's coming from. Okay, because it's not a accident that she's using these terms how she decides to. Okay, they all have an intention behind them. She also mentioned that we learn to whisper almost without sound. In the semi-darkness we could stretch out our arms when the aunts weren't looking and touch each other's hands across space. We learned to lip read, our heads flat on beds, turned sideways, watching each other's mouths. And this way we exchanged names, from bed to bed, Alma, Janine, Dolores, Moria, June. Now the character Moria and Janine will have a significant role to play later on, but lip syncing, so she wants you in this beginning pages to really feel how oppressed these women are. They're not allowed to talk a lot and have free conversations, and they have to really have everything, every form of communication is done in a very secretive way. Okay, and they have to wait till it's dark. So the ability to make friendships isn't something that's really promoted in her dystopian society. Now, when it goes into section 2, you start to get the real feel of her book, right? So she says here, a chair, a table, a lamp above on the white ceiling, a relief ornament in the shape of a wreath, and in the center of it a blank space plastered over, like the place in a face where the eye has been taken out. There must have been a chandelier once. They've removed anything you could tie a rope to. Now, this hints as a bit of foreshadowing. There must have been a chandelier here, because obviously if you're watching this video, you're ready for spoilers. We learn that later the handmaid who was there before her unalived herself with a rope. And right here she introduces you, bam, to the mindset of the handmaids. They don't like what they do, most of them, and a lot of them delete themselves and They are constantly searching for ways to do it because they don't want. Now, you get to choose to be handmade, you get a bit of choice, but then they start to regret their choice to become these sort of women who are getting pregnant and repopulating the society. And they're fallen women, so they have to serve with their bodies. And this is the first clue that she gives us to the dystopian society about the mental state of the handmaids and the suffering of their condition. Okay? She does a great job in making you feel despair for these women. Okay. So it's important here also to notice the kind of window she has, because in a prison, if you've looked at the designs, the windows are quite small, some have no windows at all. Okay? So she gets into a window scene here. A window, 2 white curtains under the window, a window seat with a little cushion. When the window is partly open, it opens only partly. The air can come in and make the curtains move. I can sit in the chair or on the window seat, hands folded, and watch this. Sunlight comes in through the window too, and falls on the floor, which is made of wood in narrow strips, highly polished. I can smell the polish. There's a rug on the floor, oval and braided rags. This is the kind of touch they like. Folk art, archaic, made by women in their spare time, from the things that have no further use. A return to traditional values. Waste not, want not. I am not being wasted. Why do I want? So here, unpack this. She is inverting things. So first we see the window only opens partly because they don't want her to be able to climb out and escape. But they do want some air to flow. Alright? Now, she does a really good job in this book. I'll give her credit of descriptors. You can picture what the flooring looks like. Narrow, she can smell the polish, okay? And you're like, okay, I'm there. Now, notice the stage she's setting for us. The folk art. When you think of something folky, you think of nice, happy, bubbly people, okay? You can think of traditional people who weave things, like think of in Ecuador, you'll see people making things of like very beautifully embroidered blankets and ponchos. In Peru, you see women will weave all kinds of wonderful bags and purses. I myself liked weave things, macrame, you get it, right? So she said archaic. Now remember, this writer is a feminist. So she's saying archaic and a return to traditional values. So this book is an attack on traditional values, but the way that it's done is clever. And this is why I wanted to dig into this book, because when someone reads this, they may become afraid of a traditional society. She's cleverly depicted a traditional society as something archaic, oppressive, horrid for women, right? Okay, so she set this stage. On the wall above the chair, a picture, framed but with no glass. Now, do you see what she did there? Framed but with no glass. Why is there no glass? Because the handmaid will shatter it and treat her skin like mozzarella, right? So, just within the one page, we've learned that the chandelier's been removed and there's no glass. Now, a prisoner in a cell will have items removed. Why? Because they don't want you being able to take the easy way out, right? So what is she doing here? She's depicting the traditional lifestyle as a prison, but she's doing it in a very symbolic, roundabout way. Okay? Now, on the next page, I'm not going to go sentence for sentence. I'm going with my annotations to kind of give you the thing. On the next page, she says, the bell that measures time is ringing. Time here is measured by bells. As once in nunneries, as in a nunnery too, there are few mirrors. So here, what is she hinting at? What does she say about there being no glass in the around because they try to harm themselves? So she just took a jab at nuns. So she's comparing her handmaid lifestyle to that of a nun. Nuns have to be celibate. Their life is to be dedicated to worship, not to sin. And recall how I told you she says Aunt Lydia, Aunt Elizabeth. So instead of saying sister this or sister that, which would be a direct attack at the Catholics, too on the nose, she says aunt. So it's very clever, very clever. Now, she describes what they wear, and they have red shoes, flat-heeled, and they wear red gloves. They have a white bonnet thing that they put on their head, but it has wings so that they cannot look around at people and make eye contact. It says here, except the wings around my face is red, the color of blood, which defines us. The skirt is ankle length, full, gathered to a flat yoke that extends over the chest. The sleeves are full. The white wings, too, are prescribed issue. They are to keep us from seeing, but also from being seen. I never look good in red. It's not my color. I pick up the shopping basket, put it over my arm. So here already, this is an attack on Islam. Why? Because the niqab, the hijab, the burqa, the jilbab, there's an aspect of not really wanting to be seen in terms of an adornment, a bedazzled being, right? What do the liberals use to attack Muslim clothing? They're not allowed, they say we're not allowed to express our type of female goddess nature. You know, those stupid statements they say. So, our personality traits are not worn by us. They feel that we are too plain. We are not able to be the peacock. So, this clever here, she's described this clothing as oppressive. The uniform she has to wear when going out has to consistently be the same and loose, and a lot of Muslim women wear gloves. She's depicting that her body has to be covered, that lewdness isn't allowed, and that's bad, that she's not allowed to just flaunt it all. And this will become clear later on when they introduce the character Moria, and you'll see how they play shenanigans here. Okay. Now, the handmaids, they live in a room, and they have to stay there. And her bedroom is up some stairs into a hallway. Okay. And the commanders, they wear black. The wives of the commanders wear blue. The handmaids wear red. The Marthas wear green. And the umbrellas even are color coded to who you are. What's your position in this society? Okay. Now, the Marthas wear like a dull green color, sort of similar to a surgeon's gown, like that type of shade. And they wear a bib apron over it. Okay. So you're seeing that she mentions here, she says that the Marthas, they don't have to wear veils because nobody cares to see really the face of a Martha. So she's pointing out how if you're not pretty, you don't have to wear a veil. But if you're one of the handmaids, it means that you're still fertile and that you have to be hidden. You have to be covered. Okay? So, one second, I need a little bit of water. It's important for us to see the sly antics that she's doing, because through that we can understand literature, because literature tells a story. It evokes something, and fiction can be quite potent in changing minds. If you think about how, think about how Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, which was, fire and blood, they're cultural phenomenons, aren't they? the rings of, what is that, Narnia something. My point is that things become books, then they become shows, then they become cultural phenomenons. This text has the potential to do that, and is actually already started doing that. Okay? Now, there's these people who work in the house called Rita and Cora. And I'll give you an example. Okay, let's see. She explains here that Rita kind of doesn't approve of her as a handmaid. Rita doesn't seem to be comfortable with what the handmaid does. Okay. For example, she says, frowning, she tears out 3 tokens and hands them to me. Her face might be kindly, if she would smile, but the frown isn't personal. It's the red dress she disapproves of, and what it stands for. She thinks I may be catching, like a disease or any form of bad luck. And then it goes on further. Once, though, I heard Rita say to Cora that she wouldn't debase herself like that. So here you see the predicament. The handmaid is helping to repopulate the society because there's heavy pollution and fallout. Yet people are like, we wouldn't want to choose that. So the handmaid isn't accepted by really anyone except their own. So they're really pushed into a box, into a corner. And then it goes on further. Nobody asking you, Cora said. Anyways, what could you do, supposing? Go to the colonies, Rita said. They have the choice. So here, the colonies are... There's what we've learned so far is that there's the farming colonies, but there's the colonies of the polluted land. That if you go there, usually you're gonna catch cancer, you're gonna suffer. So in this text, we hear a lot about the main character not wanting to be sent to the colonies. The colonies is used as a place of fear to the handmaids because of the pollution there, because of the unhealthy air, the polluted streams, because there was a chemical warfare in the war that led between the 2 cultures, Gilead and the others, and it polluted a lot of the groundwater, and a lot of women gave birth to deformed children. So Rita said, I'd rather go to the colonies. And Cora has always had a soft spot, you'll see later on, for the handmaid because she likes children and wants the household to have children. So think of these people as house staff, right? And then it goes on further. Anyways, they're doing it for us all, said Cora, or so they say. If I hadn't have got my tubes tied, it could have been me. Say I was 10 years younger, it's not that bad. It's not what you'd call hard work. Now here, Cora is mentioning to Rita, if she didn't have her tubes tied, she would have chose to be a handmaid to help birth more children in the society. Now, there's a fascinating thing about fertility in this book, where fertility is this prized thing. Yet, the women who have the most fertility, the handmaids, are shamed for it. And they're not really treated as mothers. They're allowed to nurse the babe, but the child is eventually taken away, and the handmaids are placed into a new household to then get impregnated and birth, and they're passed around until they can no longer fulfill that job. Now, when the line here where Cora says it's not what you call hard work, later on we see in the text that it actually is. The character Janine will show us that. But the handmaids are not allowed to have any form of pain medication when they give birth. Okay? So you can imagine, no epidural. I mean, that's going to be painful. So it is hard work. Definitely hard work. But Cora has her tube tied, so she doesn't really understand that. And the fact that the handmaids have to be passed around from man to man until they're impregnated. Now, there's another interesting aspect here I want you to hear. Okay? Now they're gossiping, and they hear something news. The Marthas know things. They talk among themselves, passing the unofficial news from house to house. Like me, they listen at doors, no doubt, and see things even with their eyes averted. I've heard them, at some times, caught whiffs of their private conversations. Stillborn it was, or stabbed her with a knitting needle, right in the belly. Jealousy, it must have been, eating her up. Or, tantalizingly, it was toilet cleaner she used. Worked like a charm, though you'd think he'd have tasted it. Must have been that drunk, but they found her out all right. So she gave us glimpses right here of what has been done to handmaids and what handmaids have done to their commanders and how jealousy is a problem. So remember, the wives of the commanders, if they could have children, they usually don't need a handmaid. But the infertile, the infertile wife, she has to be present when the husband does the sort of ritual, right? And so what's weird is that you get a glimpse into what these women suffer. Because since pregnancy is highly prized in the society that's dystopian, where they can't have kids, women want to be pregnant. They want to have kids, and they see the children as this sort of blessing, but also as a punishment. Because the wives try to harm the handmaids. And the handmaids, some of them don't want to be pregnant, and some of them suffer in the isolation, and then the child is a stillborn. So all the effort, all the training they went through doesn't always pay off. So this is how you see that they suffer. And some of the handmaids actually become dangerous to their commanders, to their households. You begin to see how there are the true believers who go into the handmaids who are like, hey, we're going to do something great. We're going to help repopulate our society. Others, they just didn't want to be sent to the colonies. They don't really want to be there. And now they become a deadly threat. So you begin to notice how that it's not necessarily something glamorous, which she wants it to seem like being pregnant is this great burden, and that the Christians want to sort of oppress all the women. Okay? She goes on further. Or I would help Rita make the bread, sinking my hands into that soft, resistant warmth which is so much like flesh. I hunger to touch something other than cloth or wood. I hunger to commit the act of touch. So here you see how the handmaidens are really neglected of human affection. They are not really allowed to hug people, to have conversations. Remember the gymnasium scene? So you can see how the mind starts to really turn against them. Neglected of human affection, no real communication, their activities are heavily controlled. They don't have a lot of leeway to do fun things. There's a privileged system in this totalitarian dystopian society of Gali. And she says that, the Marthas are not supposed to fraternize with us. So the Marthas are like, think of kitchen wenches. They make the food, that's their duty. And each person has a role to fulfill. So you're supposed to stay within that role. The handmaid is not allowed to really have any friends whatsoever. So this is why when you imagine them up in their rooms, alone, so many hours a day, they go a bit crazy. And even when they were in the Red Center being trained, which is like where they graduate from, they're not really, remember their beds are spaced out, and they're not really allowed to talk too much to each other. So you can see psychological angle that wreaks havoc on these women. Okay? Now, the tokens she's talking about are food tokens. It reminds me a little bit of food stamps in a way. WIC coupons. WIC is like a women, infants, and children food program. So there's these stores. You have a coupon for chicken, you get chicken. Because food is being rationed in this dystopian society, you can't always get what you want. Because they are in an active war. So they have to be given these food tokens. Okay. Now, the garden plays a huge role, and the gardens are the domain of the commander's wife. She goes into great detail about describing the garden, that there are wonderful flowers such as daffodils, tulips, how fragrant they are, they're spilling out in color. So a handmaiden doesn't get to go play in the garden, but the commander's wife gets to get some of her energy out in gardening. Now this hints at a suburban wife. Okay? I love going and looking at my neighbor's gardens. Okay? A woman who has a garden and takes care of it, there's a miraculous beauty to it. She's a very clever author to hint at this very unique female behavior, where you get your creative energy out with your garden. My grandma had marigolds and very pretty pom-poms. She had a very nice little garden. Birch tree. And it's just wonderful when a woman pours her heart into the garden. My dearest friend's mom had a wonderful rose garden. Okay? So the commander's wives all have these gardens. So there is beauty. Okay? And she gets to have the aroma of that. And it's their job to take care of that. So it's a very... There's no landscapers is my point. You don't... Like here you can pay a landscaper. But there it's like no. The wives are expected to have a garden and to maintain that garden. And it's an activity that the wives do to keep themselves occupied. To get their anger and frustrations out. She also mentions that the wives, they knit scarves to be sent to the angels on the front lines. So she mentions gardening, knitting, and if you recall earlier, she mentioned how they like folksy things, archaic things. So already, who are you picturing in your head that she's talking about? She's picturing the typical Mormon and Christian Americana ethos behaviors, because knitting, my eldest knows how to knit. This is an activity that's a trad value, a traditional value. Okay? She mentions that they have different designs that they do, and she at first... She's kind to Serena Joy, the commander's wife here. She studies a lot the commander's wife. You begin to notice how she behaves with the wife, and that their relationship blooms kind of later on, one of mercy even, because in this dystopian society, we see that the wives, they get to have privileges that the handmaids don't get. But they also have to accept the fact that their husband gets to have extramarital relations with the handmaid in order to produce more children for the society. So it's a way of shaming polygamy, because it's not real true polygamy, because he's not married to the handmaid. But the fact that, because they mention Abraham and Hagar, you know, they mention Abraham in here, like how Abraham was able to have children with his slave woman. So she's depicting the handmaids as that they have to do that. And then she's contrasting cleverly Serena Joy with the wife of Sarah, and I'll be pleased with her, the wife of Abraham. Okay? So you can see the cleverness that if you are very well versed in religious histories what she's doing here. Because remember, not everyone studies religion. And at a time right now where a lot of are craving religiosity, Assalamu alaikum, Shug. Let's see. We can see what they're doing here in the text. Okay. All right. Now, the guardians, they bring the handmaidens around, and the guardian will ring the doorbell for her, and you see the angels and the guardians, they have a very similar role in a way. Okay. Now, when the guardians come around, they'll set down the bag and salute the wives. They're sort of a protective arm for the handmaidens, right? But remember, there's a gloom of not being able to have any connection with anyone. Now, Aunt Lydia, there's a line here. Aunt Lydia said it was best not to speak unless they asked you a direct question. Try to think of it from their point of view, she said, her hands clasped and wrung together, her nervous, pleading smile. It isn't easy for them. So here, the aunts are training the handmaidens before they graduate and are sent to households, that you need to be kind to the wives because it's not easy for the wives to accept that there's a handmaid in the household, right? And then the whole don't speak unless you're spoken to, it just goes to show, again, layer upon layer, that what the handmaidens are deprived of. Deprivation is like the key of the handmaiden. And it's important for us to understand that. Okay, now further, this little nugget here just shows you, helps you to understand what kind of society they're living in. Even now, there is no real money anymore. There's still a black market. There's always a black market. There's always something that can be exchanged. She then was a woman who might bend the rules, but what did I have to trade? I looked at the cigarette with longing. For me, like liquor and coffee, they are forbidden. So, the commander's wife smokes a lot. And she's not a spring chicken. She has arthritis and walks with a cane, okay? But she's a chain smoker, and she wears lipstick. And you're not really supposed to do that. So, she mentions here cashless society. Now, Christians, most heavily, they're the ones who sound the alarm in America of the cashless society, digital currency, the digital economy, and how easy it will be for your funds to be shut off. So what she did here was take a cultural phenomenon that is discussed by the right-wing Christians and place it in her book. So it's very clever because she's taking modern trending topics and placing it into her text. So a cashless society. These people live in a cashless society, but she's telling you there's still a black market where people trade things. So she's noticing that the commander's wife, she does bend the rules. And the handmaidens don't really have much to trade because they're so deprived. Now, the handmaidens are not allowed to drink, smoke, or have coffee because they have to stay healthy as possible in order to grow a baby. Now, there is another example of what she looks like, okay? Her eyebrows were plucked into thin arch lines, which gave her a permanent look of surprise or outrage or inquisitiveness, such as you might see on a startled child. But below them her eyelids were tiredly. Not so her eyes, which were the flat, hostile blue of a midsummer sky in bright sunlight, a blue that shuts you out, and that she has a chin like a clenched fish. So you're getting to see how she's kind of, I don't want to say mocking the commander's wife, but she does have a way of behaving that is judgmental. So she was told that you should realize it's not easy for the wives to have a handmaiden around, but you can't help but notice the tension between the two, because the wife has a control has the wife can send the handmaiden into a deep punishment. It's sort of like the slave fearing the slave owner's wife. The slave fearing the plantation owner's wife. This is the vibe you get, okay? Another dialogue here. I know you aren't stupid, she went on. She inhaled, blew out the smoke. I've read your file. As far as I'm concerned, this is like a business transaction. But if I get trouble, I'll give you trouble back. You understand? Yes, ma'am, I said. Don't call me ma'am, she said irritably. You're not a Martha. I didn't ask what I was supposed to call her, because I could see that she hoped I would never have the occasion to call her anything. So this is how you see them start out. I've read your file. So the handmaidens have files. And they do these confessionals in the beginning before they are converted. So they are not just going in blind into the situation, but the government of Gilead does a full profile on each handmaiden. Okay? Now, business transaction. Do you see here? So I think surrogacy should be banned. This is like a not necessarily surrogacy, but if you recall the hadith, it talks about how the slave will give birth to their owner. This child will be born into a class system that the handmaiden mom will not ever enjoy. So the handmaidens are giving birth to children for the upper echelon of society. Okay. So remember that. So there's no affection being done here. So the coldness of that. This isn't personal, it's just business, right? So again, another layer of isolation for the handmaid. And don't call me ma'am, you're not a Martha. So you can see how she's being reminded of her place. I was disappointed. I wanted then to turn her into an older sister, a motherly figure, someone who would understand and protect me. So here you see the sort of humanistic thing that women do when they're faced with some type of trauma in a tough situation. We women do sometimes do that. We turn some women who are older than us into a motherly figure. This makes you feel for the handmaiden. You want her to not be so isolated and alone. But how could that happen when the woman has to share her husband? Is the paradox you get here, right? And the wife can protect the handmaid, but to a certain degree. So the wife has the capacity to make the handmaiden have an easier life or very difficult, isolated life. Okay. The wife in my posting before this had spent most of her time in her bedroom. The Martha said she drank. I wanted this one to be different. I wanted to think I would have liked her in another time and place, another life, but I could see already that I wouldn't have liked her, nor she me. Now, she shows you right here, she's been in another household before. Now, the Marthas, the kitchen wenches essentially, they're the ones who transfer a lot of gossip and are pointing out that the last wife was just so unhappy that she was really an alcoholic and just isolated herself. So you can see that even though the wives have more privileges, they still suffer in their own way, right? She put her cigarette out, half smoked, in a little scrolled ashtray on the lamp table beside her. She did this decisively, one jab, one grind, not the series of genteel taps favored by many of the wives. So here you see the behavior differences of this wife. She's older, more sassy, like Camilla. I think of her face as like the King Charles of England. His wife Camilla has that kind of old, tired English look. not very, never really was beautiful, but always kind of dried up like a raisin and scratchy. This is how I imagine her, because just the way you put your cigarette out says a lot about like tap, 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 but she's like grinding it, you know? Very determined. As for my husband, she said, he's just that, my husband. I want that to be perfectly clear. Till death do us part, it's final. Yes, ma'am, I said again, forgetting they used to have dolls for little girls that would talk if you pulled a string at the back. I thought it was sounding like that. Voice of a monotone, voice of a doll. She probably longed to slap my face. They can hit us, there's scriptural precedent, but not with any implement, only with their hands. So here you see the scriptural precedent taking a jab at how women are allowed to be smacked. So this hints at how she views the Christians and how she views Islam, because the ability, pardon me, for a woman to be disciplined is something that the feminists hate. The feminists don't really say much when a man is being beaten by a very jive, loudmouth, combative woman. But if they see any type of minor slap, then done by a male upon a female, then it's the end of the world. But here she did something clever where the woman is allowed to punish the other woman. So she's playing with that, and if you look at the domestic violence rate between lesbian couples, it's quite high. But that doesn't get talked about as much as men defending themselves against a psychotic woman, right? You begin to see the way she plays with that. But you also see how she's at the mercy of the commander's wife. And this is important because this text is very detailed. She wants you to see the nuances of where everyone stands, the parameters of what they're allowed to do, because it paints the dystopian pictures. Now she goes on here. She's talked about how before the war she would watch Growing Souls Gospel Hour, where they would tell Bible stories for children and sing hymns. And she mentions the Bible consistently here in her dystopian society. So she's really framing it as fanaticism. What happens how women suffer when Christians take over. This is the whole goal of her book. But as I've mentioned before, she attacks the Christians for is the same thing that she can attack us Muslims for. So it's important for us to really dig into the text and see what she's up to. Okay. The guardians also wash the cars for the commanders. Now, one of the guardians of her household is called Nick. And they don't really get issued wives because they're low status. So, if you recall, on some incel forums, there's been posts where they said the government should issue wives to people. And I screenshot it a long time ago, but there has been discussions of arranged marriages, assigned marriages on a government level, okay? But so she puts this in her dystopian novel here, where you have to be a certain level of man in order to have a wife. And your wives are issued. You don't get to freely pick them. Okay? Now, she describes how he looks. He has like a French face. He's lean. He's got muscles. And he whistles a lot. And he seems a bit cheery. I won't spoil everything about Nick, but this is where we get introduced to him. So, when she walks past him, she's supposed to drop her head and turn so that her winged bonnet kind of hides her face. And if they're caught looking at each other, they can be punished. So he winks at her, and she just realized he's taken a risk, and that she could actually report him. If the men communicate with the handmaids, they can be reported and punished. You're not really allowed to be friendly. Okay? And there's these groups called the Eyes. They're like the Gestapo, secret police. They also test the handmaidens, so if they break rules, some of them are taken and punished and sent immediately to the colonies and swift away into a black van. So the paranoia comes out very clearly in the character because she's living in a highly policed state society where everyone is a spy and where there isn't really much happiness. Okay? Now, she uses very descriptive things as well. The gate, and then has like the sidewalk is a red brick. She focuses a lot on the landscapes and what it looks like. No. Okay, so here we go. I used to be bad at waiting. They also serve who only stand and wait, said Aunt Lydia. She made us memorize it. She also said, not all of you will make it through. Some of you will fall on dry ground or thorns. Some of you are shallow-rooted. She had a mole on her chin that went up and down while she talked. She said, think of yourselves as seeds. And right then her voice was wheedling, conspiratorial, like the voices of those women who used to teach ballet classes to children, and who would say, arms up in the air now, let's pretend we're trees, and I stand on the corner pretending I'm a tree. Blessed be the fruit, she says to me, the accepted greetings among us. May the Lord open, I answer, the accepted response. So here, you see something clever here. I really started connecting with the aunts, and I really like their character because I can see their spiritual guidance where they're trying to realize, like, hey, not all the handmaidens will make it through the training session. Not all of them will conform to what they're supposed to, okay? The mentorship and coaching that the aunts do to the girls is important, but they're also tough. So I believe, like I said earlier, her aunts are a mockery of nuns, okay? If you look in Hollywood, you'll see how some nuns are depicted as psychotic monsters. Think of in Game of Thrones, the lady who says, shame, shame, and how she really tortures Cersei, and she's like the seven-pointed star. She really likes the High Sparrow who resembles the Pope. I forget her name, the character's name. But that type of vindictive, sadistic, religious woman who tries to train the girls. If you remember in Game of Thrones where like that religious lady was trying to train Marjorie and trying to train Cersei, and how Marjorie bent the knee in a way, whereas Cersei didn't, to a degree. Okay, so it's the type of picture she's trying to paint for the aunts here, which is very common, how they depict Muslim women and Christian women. For Muslim women, they depict the madrasa women as that, as they just beat kids senselessly. So the beating, religious women beating, is what she's trying to put in her book. Okay. Now, blessed be the fruit means, to the fruit is the child. Be fruitful and multiply. That's a Christian saying. So she's trying to hint at, how they have these sort of cult responses, which reminds us of how we Muslims say, Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah. We have phrases we say. There are reminders. They have their reminders here. May the Lord open. We have accepted responses to each other. Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum assalam. We have greetings. We have hadiths about how important greetings are, and how greetings fortify our belief and strength believers, right? Believers have rights upon each other. So here, in this dystopian world, she's taken such phrases and inverted them to where you say it, you just go through the motions because that's all you're allowed to say. You're not really allowed to say anything else other than that. So she twisted it. Okay? She also mentions here, we aren't allowed to go there except in twos. This is supposed to be for our protection, though the notion is absurd. We are well protected already. The truth is that she is my spy, as I am hers. If either of us slips through the net because of something that happens on one of our daily walks, the other will be held accountable. So, chaperones. The handmaidens have to have chaperones. Now, if you're familiar, the Taliban of Afghanistan told women that they need to go out with a male chaperone. The feminists said that was oppressive. Whereas people like me in the past, I mentioned that, women shouldn't travel too much alone because it's quite dangerous. And, pardon me, if you recall, there's been tons of times I posted where a woman went hiking, something happened to her. Women they go to travel to another country, something terrible happens. You're not supposed to walk in at night alone, and you're not supposed to think that you're in Disneyland, okay? But also having a chaperone protects your honor and keeps you in check, alright? So, here, she flips that. She puts a spying element in there. Where the handmaidens, they have a sisterhood, but yet they are supposed to report each other's faults. So they are a sisterhood, but they are still cunning vipers and spies who will turn each other in. And you can't speak against the regime, otherwise the other handmaiden will turn you in and you'll be sent off to the toxic waste dump in the colonies. So you can see how even with the person that she went through the schooling with in the Handmaiden Academy, essentially, she can't form a real bond. You see? So she's, so far in the text, shown us the layers of isolation. So this is important to understand how they're so isolated that even when they have a baby, and when you're a mom, and you bond with your baby, that's like your world. If you don't have anything else in the world but you have your baby, and your baby loves you. Except the child will be taken from you after it's weaned, and you'll be sent to the newest family to do it all over again. And this is why so many of the handmaidens don't last, okay? So it's important for us to see that, because when a feminist writes a book, there's messages and codes in here. And as a religious woman, I want to go through it and be like, hey, I see what you did. Because that way they see that their agenda isn't as clever as they think it is, right? Now, her walking maid is called Othglen. Maidens are given names, and they are not allowed to say their old name from before they were a handmaid. And when that handmaid is gone and they get a new one, that name is applied to the new handmaid. So their identity is erased. And in cults, you're given a new name. Okay? Your past self is erased. So the author is hinting at cult behaviors. And atheists see religion as giant cults. Feminists see religions as giant cults. So you can see what she's doing by making the names of the people interchanged. Okay? Oh yes, and then here she mentions the Baptists. Okay? They're having her and the other handmaid are having a dialogue about the war. Okay? Okay, let's see, right here. During these walks, she has never said anything that was not strictly orthodox. But then, neither have I. She may be a real believer, a handmaid in more than name. I can't take the risk. The war's going well, I hear, she says. Please be, I reply. We've been sent good weather, which I receive with joy. They've defeated more of the rebels since yesterday. Praise be, I say. I don't ask her how she knows. What were they? Baptists. They had a stronghold in the Blue Hills. They smoked them out. Praise be. Okay, so it's the praise be. We say alhamdulillah, all praise is due to Allah. You can see that Christian sectarian violence is what's happening here. A civil war, but also a sectarian war. Okay? You see that here as well. Now, she said here that you can only say what's orthodox. So, she makes in this book the liberal behavior seem posh and freeing, and the orthodox as dreary, oppressive, and unlikable. Makes me want to write a book where I make the liberal what it really is, and then, which is horrible, and then show the beauties of orthodoxy. But remember, the feminist goal through fiction is to make it seem as dreary as possible. Okay? Now I'm going to pause here, and then next time I'll pick up, because we've gone through about 20 pages. So on the first 20 pages, you as a reader are welcomed into a world that you don't really quite understand yet. Because when you first open the text, it's not like it tells you this was a world where this happened and this happened and this happened. It's mystery. You're slowly unveiling what's happening in this imaginary world. And as you travel along, the characters' narrations show you what kind of world you're heading into. And for female readers, she makes it as gloomy as possible, and is making you see that, well, I wouldn't want to be in that position, right? There's a class structure, the wars going on, color coding hierarchies. Remember, the Marthas wear a dull green, wives wear baby powder blue, the commanders wear black, and handmaidens wear red. So, red also, the Jezebel was always, the French whore, the Jezebel, was depicted in a red dress with red lipstick, red high heels. Red has connotations to it. So, making the handmaiden wear red is very occultic, but also hints at the lust aspect, because the handmaiden isn't honored with the pale blue color. When you think of pale powder blue, you think of spring, robin eggs, because robin egg shells are powdery blue. You think of wonderful, blissful spring. When you think of red, there's more of a vampiric meanness to it, because it is the color of our blood. The hearts, you think of Valentine's Day, but there's no love for the handmaiden. So the handmaiden doesn't get to experience love. You would think the handmaiden, by wearing red all day, is an advertisement for Valentine's Day. But Eros, that Greek/Roman little flying Cupid, is not there. Where the Cupid's flying around, shooting arrows, making people fall in love, and that folktale. No one wants to fall in love with the handmaiden, and if you befriend the handmaiden, she can turn on you and report you, or you can report her for accepting your advances. So no matter which way you look at it, the handmaiden can never really trust anyone, nor can anyone really trust the handmaiden. And they have one job to do, which is to have children, and they're usually given to the elites who can't have children of their own, because sterility has happened because of the herbicides, the fungicides, the pesticide. There was a nuclear power plant that exploded. There's a bunch of toxic waste. So a lot of things are pretty much polluted, and people are getting birth defects. So it's lowering the birth rate numbers, and the Galit society, like their culture, their community, wants to prop up the numbers. So, I mean, I'm not saying I would be the best writer in the world, but I could have made it. I could have made the polygamy sound much better, right? But it's not a secret how she puts the Bible in there, because there's others. I don't want to spoil it all for you. We should go in order, but the women's behavior being monitored is a religious value, right? She puts it in here really that the women are policed too much for their behavior. They're not allowed to just do whatever they want. And the aunts train them to be obedient, follow the rules. The commander's wife is supposed to watch them. And the commanders themselves are to be regulated, and the women are never alone. There's also the children of the commanders and the wives. They're called, I forgot, the veiled daughters or something, and they're raised, mashallah, to they're never alone with a man their entire lives, and they're virgins on their wedding day, and they are raised to be wives, and they have arranged marriages. She puts that in this book like that's something evil. And later on, as we go in the text, you'll see how she paints the liberal, feminist, hedonistic hookup culture as grand, and the religious, chaste, modest woman as oppressed and put in a prison cell. That is why I took time to explain to you the scene of the handmaiden's room. And the handmaiden's room will play a key role because they're put in there. When a prisoner is in isolation, their mind goes in a lot of spaces. She makes her character do that, where she's put in a room with bland food. Every object that she could use to delete herself from Earth is removed. And she's not allowed to have any friends, and there's no electronics or anything like that. So it's a very primitive room, very bare bones. And then this also hints at how we women love to decorate and make a room our own. But in here she says that she doesn't really call the room her room. On page 8 she says, "The door of the room, not my room, I refuse to say my, is not locked. In fact, it doesn't shut properly. I go out in the polished hallway which has a runner down the center, dusty pink." So here you see her say right there, she doesn't call her room. She sees it as like a prison cell. And the door doesn't really lock. When I was little, my grandpa would say, "You're not allowed to shut the door." So he would tell me, "I'm going to take the handle off the door so you can close it." And that's fine. I mean, my door was open most of the time. And I don't let my children, they're not allowed to have the door closed unless they're changing, and then it must be open. So the reason this is you don't want your kid to be using drugs or doing something horrific. And when the cat's away, the mice will play. This is a tradition that helps, I think, instill good character. I don't know if you've had the same thing, but it was quite normal in my family where doors were not allowed to be closed unless you were changing. Doors had to remain open so that your parents could walk by and see you and make sure you were not doing anything bad. Young boys, obviously, it's clear why they shouldn't be allowed to be alone in the room, because we know what they'll do. And if a son has sneaked over a woman, and the door is closed, and you knock before entering, he has time to hide her in the closet or have her jump out the window. So no closed doors, monitoring at all times. So privacy is a privilege. Privacy is earned. She frames that as something bad. The handmaiden also cannot be allowed to be with the door locked because they always try to unalive themselves. So you can see how the handmaiden lives and why her room is designed the way it is. It's a very clever way of. See, I'm a hermit. But remember, the handmaidens are not allowed to write. They are not allowed to read. They're not allowed. All magazines have been burned. So, like fashion magazines. I don't read them, but there's some magazines I like to look at. They have like architecture, like fancy kitchens and how you decorate your bathroom. Stuff like that's been burned. And there was a mass book burning and door-to-door searches that the regime did to remove all items that hinted at a liberal form of living. That she says that in this book. So, we're seeing she's, because when I listen to people who don't like us Muslims, they mention things that this author mentions here in this fictional world. So we can kind of see what's going on here. And what's clever, if she were to say this stuff, just like on Twitter or directly, she would obviously be like, get pushback. But they can mask their ideas in fiction. You can mention things in fiction and get away with it, obviously, because it's fiction, but there's always still truth embedded in fiction. That's what makes it kind of interesting to read. Because even though it's a fictional scenario, you see hints of truth that come through it. So that's what she's done so far in this text, is we're seeing her feminist leanings, her liberal leanings, atheistic leanings in this text. And as I'm reading the second book, the two main characters are atheists who don't like religion. So you can kind of see where she's going at. There's so much to dissect here. But the dynamic element of the character Cora and Rita is interesting because Rita doesn't really like the handmaids, but Cora seems like a jolly kitchen wench who wants the joy of cooking for children and likes children. And you can see the way in which she treats the handmaiden with mercy, because it's like, be nice to her, she's gonna give the household a child, whereas Rita sees her as a seductress whore, So I'll pause there because I'm hungry and I want to eat, but there's a lot going on in this book and it's becoming a phenomenon. So as a Muslim woman, I want to be ahead of the curve and already have a series available dissecting and deconstructing some of the ideas within the text, a sort of literary critique, textual analysis, my typical forte. But if I was in this world, I would probably be one of the aunts or a Martha, because I like to cook, so I wouldn't mind being a cook. I wouldn't want to be one of the wives or a handmaid. I like epidurals, so I'm not trying to give birth, and I can't live with, I'll put it this way, I love my children so much, I couldn't imagine living in a world where my child is taken from me and raised by someone else. I can't do that, so, Better to be a cook or one of the aunts training the handmaidens, which is funny because the aunts are like villains in this world. It's just kind of funny. So stay tuned and let me know what you think. If you would like to do a literary critique of this book, I would recommend it because I think it's going to be one of those texts that stick around. It's already influenced the feminist thinking, so now that I've read it, when a feminist mentions to me the text, we can have a very detailed conversation. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give me the mental ammunition that I need in order to have a very tense dialogue. And I'm pretty used to this because, I would discuss Shakespeare. I'm merely into breaking things down, noticing the metaphors, noticing the symbolism. It's my forte, so this book doesn't really, it's not something I can't handle. Seems pretty unique for its own genre, But I do feel like they took an Amish archetype and just really ran with making it as miserable as possible, which I do find quite odd. But maybe one day in the future, when I have the time, who knows, maybe I could write my own book doing the opposite of what she did. So, or maybe another Muslim sister out there who watches this will get motivated and create a book countering this one, which counterculture is important. So, be steadfast. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. If you'd like to read more about what I write and see my refutations that I do consistently against the feminists, you can go to www.subscribestar.com/Milahan Archive. Hope to see you there. Take care.